The spectre of spectres haunts the internet. For the last 2 decades, ever since Spectres of Marx was written by Jacques Derrida in the late 1990s, hauntology has been all the rage. And here on Varn Blog, we don't say no to ghost. But from Frederick Jameson's nostalgia mode to the current politics of identification, identifying as an ideological type and subsuming yourself as part of your moral and ethical identity to that ideological type, trying to make yourself speak in one monologic voice, often by appeals to some imagined past. The imaginary, that which we project upon as the basis of our history and our future, always lingers, misrecognized, partly processed, as if it is something that we can consume. Now, that's all very abstract, but let me get to what we've been doing here. See, I'm working on a book called From Wontopia to Barbarism. Not a great title yet, I don't think. And I keep on discovering key thinkers come back. Fisher's use of Jacques Derrida's hauntology, Bakhtin's polyphony, and heteroglossia. And if you will note, sometime before this video, there will be some nailing it down that attaches that. The history of the programs of the early communist movement. The problems of emotivism. All these things seem very disparate and separate. But what we have here, for me, is the shock of recognition about the different things I've been working on that make what I'm doing very, very separate from most of what the left is doing. I have no want to return to a program of the past, invariant or not. So while I might not have interest in these programs, the understanding of what these programs were and how we would build a new one, what programmatic unity would actually be, is really important. But that program has to emerge out of a multiplicity of voices. It cannot be just a monolithic imaginary of what people think would be in the best interest of the working class. This means changing your orientation fundamentally. The shock of recognition. The specters of the past. Right now, you're haunted by the failure of Bernie. But Bernie himself, in some ways, was a ghost of the failure of the New Left. A late coming failure at that. I mean, he was on the back end of that. And yet here we are. When I talk about emotivism, it was not to get you guys to reject emotions as part of what guides morality. This idea, however, that logic is just the slave of the passions, or that logic should be removed from affect and emotionality, both are non-starters. They're based off of flawed modalities of mind. So getting us back into listening into the multiple voices, the contradictions, the tensions, the feedback loops emerging from the political subjects that we want to see, and trying to recognize that we'll never make them speak in unison in a perfect way is important, right? If your movement of the class in itself to the class for itself requires the class for itself to act unilaterally in one way, that never happens. In history, it doesn't happen. Oh, you might go, oh, it happened with the bourgeoisie. No, it did not. Most of your politics that's very real, antagonistic, and oppositional is bourgeois politics. to pretend that just because it only has one class interest that it works monologically like that or monolithically, it's foolish. So you need to get these voices closer together while realizing they'll never speak entirely the same. But what do people do when voices don't say what they want? They project elsewhere, in the ghost of the past, or in the places where you aren't, in geopolitical corners where you're asking the most oppressed with the least resources to save the entire planet, as if that's not an immoral demand in and of itself. But why would you do that? Because you rendered those people, those classes, those oppressed as a unitary object of which you can project. You turn them into a ghost, even though they are very real. Materialism doesn't mean hanging your hat on impossibilities. Demand the impossible, sure. But demanding the impossible is because you were going to get something. You weren't going to get the impossible. Yet, when it comes to geopolitical analysis, that's where a lot of you have ended up. Hoping on a hope and a prayer that everything you know about the rawness of power politics is thrown out of the window, and that you can pretend you live in an insurrectionary 19th century where you're not dealing with the level of weaponry that exists in modern states, or the level of butchery it enables, because we haven't seen it in a long time. Even during the war on terror, you weren't dealing with the loss of 2% of anyone's population. I don't think. Anyway, it may have gotten that high in Iraq, but I doubt it. We are seeing that now. You wanted your multipolarity as a way out, but you thought that it was only going to end one way, that there was only one way it would go. You know, I keep on making these references to Bakhtin, but Bakhtin's critique of the dialectic was not that the dialectic was wrong, but that people tried to strip the dialectic of its historical context and the voices that created it historically, to focus only on the aggregates and the collective imaginary and not on what constituted the collective imaginary in material reality. I've been telling you for a decade in various podcasts to look at the divisions in the proletariat. I've been telling you for a decade to quit thinking of countries as acting monolithically. That, you know, just because of what the Chinese or Russian or American government does represents the united interests of those people or even those governments. That it actually, just like with yourself, where you know about your own country, has internal machinations and winners and losers internally as well. The reason why you turn to the past for hope so much and why you feel like the future has been denied you is also because you kind of want it. Don't lie. You see, the great lie of the left is that you're not getting anything you want, because actually you are. But what you're getting removes you responsibility. You can feel like, oh, we don't have power, so we didn't do any of this, but you participated in this. Most of you participated in a popular front resistance to Trump that helped Biden get reelected. Now you're going to see the cows come home from that. Others of you have engaged in populism and in talking points that are ad hoc and inconsistent, and with people who on one hand will talk a left game and the next hand secretly want crass collaboration. I think that is obvious. Then when you try to tail their cultural politics, you don't understand why no one trusts you, because clearly you didn't have a cultural politics of your own. Well, if one side represents a distortion of the PMC, what does it mean to distort it towards another element of the bourgeoisie, etc.? It's never that simple. Political economy is not that simple. It's never that monologic. In reality, requires you to deal with contradictory things. Most of you have gone for the easy view. Localism fails. What do? You go for executive power, despite the fact that that's both not particularly democratic and also highly hemmed in by an administrative state. When push comes to shove, you defend the administrative state because you think one day you'll be in control of it. Or you defend it off of harm reduction. But what harm did you really reduce? As I've said over and over and over again, we don't know what would have happened if Trump won the election, but I can tell you the assault on trans rights accelerated under Biden at the state level and was more successful at the state level than ever at the federal. The immigration issue, well, progressives just dropped it when it was too hard for Biden to do, and he actually doubled down on Trump policies and extended them, and then the right moved further right, predictably. In a game theoretical apparatus where the left is captured, the only movement is right. And until you realize that the only way you are not captured is to risk your allies losing, because they might lose anyway, because you have to speak to a class that speaks in a variety of voices with a variety of concerns, of which no singular cultural politics will actually meet them all. And because of that, tailing some other sections' politics as a distraction to cynically pick up cadres is useless. Similarly, pretending you can build a domestic politics solely off of foreign policy is just as dumb as pretending that you can have a domestic politics and ignore all foreign policy altogether when you and if you ever came to power. These are emotional responses that get transformed and flipped into made to sound like clear, logical arguments. This is nostalgia for a past that you never knew and probably did not really exist. It is not a ghost in reality, but your image of what a ghost from the time period would look like. Well, I'm here to tell you, you can recognize those ghosts now. Let that shock run through you. And let's start to build. The time for mourning was over, and you didn't realize it had even begun. Now it's time to rethink. From about 2012 forward, I've been telling people to read Max Elbaum's Revolutions in the Air to get a feeling for what happened and what failed with the new communist movement as it emerged from the new left. And again, now at the end of this period, just like in the beginning, I tell you to read that book. Is it a perfect book? No. But it is a useful one. Like and subscribe. Hit the bell. Leave comments. Find the Buzzsprout podcast if you like listening. Leave reviews on Apple Podcast or on your pod server. All these things help us, and we do appreciate them. And on that note, I'd like to thank my new Cohanans. We have a few new ones, and I'd like to give them their shout out. I'd like to thank Hunter M. and Daryl C. Thank you so much for your support, and have a great day.